What's poppin', my Sky Guys and Dooku Dudes? It's me, MT, and welcome back to the Heavy Spoiler Show. This is going to be a breakdown of the 2002 movie Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, the movie that truly marked the beginning of the end of the Galactic Republic. So, let's go ahead and jump into it. After the classic Star Wars opening crawl, the movie opens with a small fleet of Naboo ships approaching the city planet of Coruscant, capital of the Galactic Republic. And following this opening crawl with a spaceship entering the frame has been a bit of a Star Wars tradition ever since we saw Princess Leia's ship getting chased down by the Empire at the very beginning of A New Hope. And if we know anything about the Naboo, is that they sure do love their chrome, which is why this Naboo Royal Cruiser is absolutely covered in it. It's actually the same type of chrome that makes up Captain Phasma's armor in the sequel trilogy, as her armor was made from the scraps of one of Palpatine's old Naboo ships. And this is actually a different type of starship than the one that we saw Queen Amidala whipping in The Phantom Menace, as this new J-type diplomatic barge was purposely meant to be an upgrade from the J-type 327 Nubian starship from the last movie, with improved shield and warp drive generators, showing that Naboo security learned from the almost disastrous shortcomings of the ship from the last film. As the ship descends onto the planet below, we can see skyscrapers peaking above the clouds, reaching out into the atmosphere. These buildings are actually so high up in the sky that those who have offices near the top have to have a special gas vented into those offices so they can breathe. However, when the ships finally land onto the platform, the Naboo Royal Cruiser is immediately blown the hell up by space terrorism. Dun dun dun! And oh no, now Senator Amidala is dead. Oh god, Senator Padme is dead. Psych! That was the motherfreaking decoy, son! Senator Padme is still alive and well, disguised as one of the N1 starfighter pilots flying with R2-D2, Padme's true bodyguard. However, unfortunately, a bunch of Naboo security personnel would perish in this explosion, including Padme's secret doppelganger, Corday, played by actress Veronica Segura. And another casualty of the blast was the white and green R2-H7, the astromech of security Captain Typho. And played by actor Jay Lagaya, Captain Typho is actually the nephew of Naboo Captain Panaka from The Phantom Menace, and would be the very man who would set up the decoy operation in the first place. Captain Typho's character was written into this movie as a result of Captain Panaka actor Hugh Corsi declining to return for this film after Lucasfilm would not allow him to read the script before signing on. Apparently, the original plan was to have Panaka to be amongst these victims of this explosion in order to up the emotional stakes early on in the movie, which is kind of messed up, and I personally am kind of glad that this actor did not waste his time. And speaking of not wasting time, you do not want to waste any more time not wearing one of our Star Wars and Andor inspired shirts over at the Heavy Spoilers merch store. On the front of our new Empire shirt is a little Death Star, while a giant TIE fighter covered in the Aurebesh Star Wars language is nice and big on the backside. It's a sick design, and we're really proud of it, so head on over to the Heavy Spoilers merch store today and pick one up for yourself. In the 10 years since Episode 1, Padme Amidala served 2 terms as Queen of Naboo before being requested by the next queen to serve as Senator of Naboo. And the reason for Padme's trip to Coruscant was to be a strong advocate against the proposed Military Creation Act, which would have the Republic form a grand army in order to fight the growing threat of the Confederacy of Independent Systems, a group of planets who decided to remove themselves from the Galactic Republic because they felt like the Galactic Senate was treating them unfairly. And in addition to repeated issues of unfair taxation, these worlds also believed that the Senate merely cared about advancing their own political careers and prioritizing the needs of those affluent inner core worlds. This Confederacy of Independent Systems, or CIS for short, was of course partially funded by the Trade Federation that were behind the invasion of Naboo in The Phantom Menace, while also being funded by a number of other federations, including the Techno Union, who would provide the CIS with their army of battle droids, the Stalgassan Hive on the planet of Geonosis, who was in charge of assembling the battle droid army in Geonosian factories, as well as the Corporate Alliance, the Commerce Guild, the Retail Caucus, and the Intergalactic Banking Clan. Then we transition to Chancellor Palpatine's office, where members of the Jedi Council talk with Palpatine, including Jedi Grand Master Yoda, voiced by Frank Oz, and Jedi Master Mace Windu, played by Samuel L. Jackson. And with them are Jedi Masters Ki-Adi Mundi, Plo Koon, Kit Fisto, Luminara Unduli, and Luminara's Padawan Barriss Offee, who would actually one day bomb the Jedi Temple and kill a number of Jedi, Republic soldiers, and innocent people in the process. All because she believed that the Jedi had lost their way, which, to be fair, was 100% true. But this, of course, would all go down in the 5th season of the Clone Wars animated series around episode 18. And next to Ian McDermott's Palpatine is his bald Umbaran senior administrative aide, Sly Moore, played by actress Sandy Finlay. And although she doesn't have a big role in the movies, it would later be revealed that the reason why Moore got to work so close with Palpatine is due to her own Force sensitivity and admiration for the Sith religion. And this would eventually cause her to be picked up by Darth Maul and forced to endure a series of grueling tests in order for Darth Sidious to fully trust her enough to let her into his very small evil circle. Sidious would then secretly use Sly's Force sensitivity to his advantage by having her Force mind trick Palpatine's political opponents in order to gain valuable political intel from them. But yeah, their discussion about the rise of the CIS is cut off by the arrival of Padme to Chancellor Palpatine's office, an office decorated red to match the red theme of the dark side. And as they enter, statues can also be seen placed throughout Palpatine's office. And these statues are actually prominent figures from Galactic Republic history known as the Sages of Duarte. And these sages were a group of philosophers and lawmakers who actually helped draft the original Galactic Constitution. And though all 4 of these sages were important, the most prominent member of the 4 sages appears to be Sistros Nevitt, the hooded Bronzium statue with his palms in the praying position. And even though Sistros Nevitt was instrumental in the formation of the Galactic Republic, she would also use her political position for her own personal advantage without a shred of guilt or remorse, with her dispassionate and cold personality being attributes that would win her great favor in the eyes of Sheev Palpatine, who too aspired to use his political position to benefit his own self. The Speaker's staff, held in the hands of Vice Chair of the Senate, Mas Ameda, the blue-horned Chagrian, who, like Sly Moore, is often seen besides Palpatine, has a little Sistros carving at the very top of the staff to commemorate this terrible, terrible politician of the past. And also, it's inside this statue of Sistros that Palpatine would secretly store his 2 Sith lightsabers right under everybody's noses, which is quite wild. But while we're on the subject of Palpatine's office, on Palpatine's desk, we can see a small glass figure of what appears to be a pyramid, which could be a nod to Palpatine's role as a Sith, as the Sith have shaped their temples and holocrons in the shape of pyramids in the Star Wars universe, much like how the Pyramid Sith holocron from Star Wars Rebels connected with the pyramid-shaped Sith temple on Malachor. And even the cosmic doors to Sith temples inside of the World Between Worlds tend to be shaped like pyramids as well. So there's a good chance that this glass object is a piece of Sith art that Palpatine proudly displays on his desk to taunt the blind Jedi right in front of their faces. But yeah, as Padme greets the Jedi, Yoda tells her that he's glad to see her safe. And this is actually the first movie where a completely computer-generated Yoda was the intention from the very start, as The Phantom Menace would actually use a puppet Yoda until George Lucas would throw in a CG Yoda for subsequent Blu-ray releases. Padme then shares that she believes that former Jedi Count Dooku, played by the late Sir Christopher Lee, is behind the attacks on her life, which would actually end up being the case. However, Mace Windu would immediately dismiss this idea due to believing that no one from their order could ever attempt to do such a thing, showcasing the arrogance of the Jedi Council and their belief that they've all conquered their dark sides through their self-righteous lifestyles, which is not exactly the case. And after Palpatine recommends that Obi-Wan and Anakin protect Padme, the Jedi are immediately sent to Padme's suites, where Anakin is reunited with Padme after 10 years of dreaming about her every day like a creepo. Ewan McGregor reprises his role as Obi-Wan Kenobi, while Hayden Christensen steps into the role of Anakin, taken over from actor Jake Lloyd. Other actors who auditioned for the role of this older Anakin Skywalker were Leonardo DiCaprio, widely celebrated for his role in the Titanic, both Christian Bale and the late Heath Ledger of Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy, the late Paul Walker, who played Brian Connor in the Fast and Furious franchise, Chris Klein from the American Pie films, Colin Hanks from Orange County, Ryan Philippe from Cruel Intentions, James Vanderbeek and Joshua Jackson from Dawson's Creek, Misha Collins from Supernatural, Jonathan Brandis from The Second Neverending Story, Eric Christian Olsen from NCIS Los Angeles, and Eric Von Detten from the Disney Channel masterpiece that is Brink, the best movie that Disney Channel has ever produced, probably tied with Smart House and High School Musical 1. Anyway, the Jedi are also, of course, reunited with Jar Jar Binks, played once again by actor Ahmed Best. And I think one of the funniest facts about this movie's development is how the working title for this film was purposely called Jar Jar's Big Adventure, which is a really fun way to troll everybody who hated the character Jar Jar Binks in the first prequel movie. Like, I'm sure Star Wars fans at the time heard that title and started freaking out that the Phantom Menace sequel was going to be even more Jar Jar focused than before. But yeah, pretty much the second they reunite, Anakin immediately starts hitting on Padme and rashly promises that both him and Obi-Wan will find whoever was behind her assassination attempt, outside of their mission mandate from the Jedi Council. This then leads to our first hints towards friction between this master and apprentice duo. And when Obi-Wan tries to remind Anakin of that, Anakin defies his master and the Council by asking why, instead of just doing what he's told. A character trait that Anakin would never grow out of that would eventually lead him to question his loyalty to the Jedi. As Anakin sulks about Padme seemingly forgetting all about him, bounty hunter Jango Fett, played for the first time by Tamara Morrison, meets up with his fellow bounty hunter friend Zam Wesell and hands her a cylinder of poisonous cohoons, deadly insectoid creatures that were purposely starved so that they can rush towards the nearest source of body heat that they can find. These creatures actually hail from a planet called Indumodo and typically act as predators for any mammalian creature as big as a dog, but will occasionally go for a human if hungry enough. And I know Star Wars fans have brought this up before, but this is truly the laziest assassination plot in science fiction history. Cohoons are being sent to kill Padme because Zam made them, because Jango Fett told her to do it, because Dooku hired Jango Fett to do it, because Trade Federation Viceroy Newt Gunray asked Dooku to do it, and Dooku didn't want to do it himself. But that's not all. Zam Wesell would then give the cohoons to her ASN-121 assassin courier droid to slice open Padme's windows and make that deadly warm delivery. Like, I'm not sure why Dooku didn't just buy his own damn assassin courier droid and just do it himself. But hey, I guess Dooku's just balling like that. He can just buy layers and layers and layers of assassins to do one job. But even though this bounty hunter, played by actress Liana Walsman, appears to be human, Zam Wesell is actually a member of the reptilian Claudite race from the planet Zolan, a race with shape-shifting abilities, which is why she's referred to as a changeling in the movie. Changeling just means shapeshifter and isn't the name of a race of aliens. As Big Zam makes the handoff, an advertisement above her shows the face of a member of the Bith alien race, the same race that Figrin Dan and the Modal Nodes were when they played Tatooine's Mos Eisley Cantina in A New Hope. And this ad may very well be an advertisement for that very band for all we know. And while this assassin droid breaks into Padme's room, Anakin confesses to his master that reoccurring dreams of his mother have been keeping him up at night, and that he wishes that he was dreaming of Padme instead, immediately displaying Anakin's deep attachments to these two major women in his life. Such attachments were one of the main reasons why the Jedi Council was hesitant to accept a 10-year-old Anakin into their order in the first place, because Anakin had a whole decade to let his fear of losing his mother someday grow as he grew more and more attached to her. Because the Jedi were a bit of an extreme cult, they usually only seek out toddlers ages 1 to 3 to bring into the Jedi Order so those younglings can grow up and think of the Jedi Order as their true home, because they believe that fearing the loss of an attachment can lead to feelings of anger, which then leads to feelings of hate, which then leads to suffering and the dark side. However, because the Jedi were blind to their own deep attachment to the light side and the Jedi religion, they didn't see how their fear of losing that light made them angry and hateful towards dark-sided actions. So much so that they encouraged those amongst their rank to do the unnatural act of burying their emotions rather than having healthy relationships with those emotions, which would then ultimately turn into suffering for Anakin Skywalker, who would then make the Jedi suffer their own downfall in return. However, right before their insect assassin could send Padme to the cosmic force in the sky, Anakin would save her life at the last second before Obi-Wan would jump through the window like an absolute madman and land onto the assassin droid. Quite a hilarious and drastic action for someone who was so against conducting an investigation into Padme's assassin in the first place. And while flying around on this assassination droid, Obi-Wan almost runs into a random alien named Magaluf, a member of the Leffingite species of alien. Magaluf was actually in a stolen speeder during that moment, as stealing speeders was one of his favorite things to do apparently. And this is before Obi-Wan nearly collides with an alien in the Galactic Senate named Bob Tyrell of the Aleen species, a senator that was apparently hanging out with a Dug named Saboka, a star in a local fan favorite holodrama program. Both these characters can be seen later on in the movie, sitting in a booth at Dex's diner when Obi-Wan goes to see his old friend. And seeing Obi-Wan on the way, Big Zam whips out the Big Blammer and shoots the assassin droid with her Kai-Steer 1284 projectile rifle. But as Obi-Wan safely lands on Anakin's XJ6 airspeeder, Zam then hops onto her Coral 2 all-environment exodrive airspeeder and attempts to flee. Anakin's yellow airspeeder in this scene seems very inspired by George Lucas's Oscar-nominated film American Graffiti from 1973, resembling the yellow 1932 Ford Coupe that the John Milner character drove in that movie. But the coolest part about this chase, in my opinion, is how it also secretly features 4 huge canon-breaking Easter eggs in the background in the form of 3 TIE fighters chasing down an X-Wing, vehicles that would not exist in the Star Wars universe until the adult Luke and Leia Skywalker era that is the Galactic Civil War. And while they were clearly only put there by the VFX team at the time as a neat little tribute to the original trilogy to please the fans, I think it would be really fun if Lucasfilm were to use some of their upcoming projects to explain why these specific vehicles were displaced in time. I mean, with the world between worlds and the Mortis gods taking center stage in Ahsoka Season 1, I think it would be super dope if Lucasfilm had 3 TIE fighters chase an X-Wing through various portals that teleport the pilots through space and time in Season 2. It would make for a great unforgettable action sequence while giving this little Easter egg a fun canonical payoff decades later, but that's just the thing that I would do anyway. But yeah, using the Force as his guide, Anakin would eventually jump off of the speeder to land directly on Zam's speeder, before losing his lightsaber while fighting for control of Zam's vehicle in the process. But luckily, Obi-Wan Kenobi is able to catch it. Anakin then causes Zam's airspeeder to crash, leading her to flee into the Outlander Gambling Club nearby. And as the Jedi first enter the Outlander Gambling Club in pursuit, Obi-Wan hands Anakin his lightsaber back, reminding him that his lightsaber is his life, before jokingly asking why he feels like Anakin is going to be the death of him. A hilarious bit of foreshadowing towards Obi-Wan's final showdown with Darth Vader in A New Hope that would end with Obi-Wan's disappearing before he could be struck down. And one of the TV screens in the club appears to be showing footage of a pod race for the patrons. But this isn't your normal pod race, oh no, but actual gameplay footage from the Star Wars Episode 1 Racer video game, with racers Dud Bolt and Bull's Roar on the screen racing on Ando Prime, an Arctic planet in the mid-rim. And next to that screen is footage of a game of Nunaball, which basically looks like Star Wars' version of American football. But instead of a football, 2 teams of droids throw around a little Nuna creature, which are tiny little alien swamp turkeys that are all over the planet Naboo, especially in the previous film. I don't know if Space PETA exists in this universe, but I'm sure that they are not happy with this sport. And to the right of that screen is footage of an Odu Piendo race that bar patrons can bet on like humans bet on horse races in real life. Odu Piendos, like the Nuna, are also flightless birds native to Naboo. And while the Jedi search for their target in this crowded space bar, we can actually see a number of past Star Wars actors and crew amongst them, like C-3PO actor Anthony Daniels and Jar Jar Binks actor Ahmed Best. George Lucas actually named Ahmed's character in this scene Ahmed Beck as a direct reference to the actor's name. And next to Ahmed Beck during the scene is a pink Twi'lek by the name of Luna Minx, played by George Lucas's daughter Katie Lucas, who also shared a scene with Ahmed Best in The Phantom Menace, when she played the role of one of Anakin's childhood friends, Amy. But Katie isn't the only member of the Lucas family that makes a cameo in this movie, as George Lucas's adopted son, Jet Lucas, would appear as Jedi Padawan Zet Jukasa later on in the background when Obi-Wan is talking to Jocasta Nu in the Jedi Archives. We would eventually see this poor Padawan be slain in front of Senator Bail Organa in Revenge of the Sith during Order 66. R2-D2 puppeteer and droid unit supervisor Don Baez can also be seen super quickly, along with the rest of the crew members of his droid team, which include Justin Dix, Zeynep Selkuk, and Trevor Tai. Don Baez also had cameos in A Return of the Jedi, where he played a Bith alien named Barquin Dan, a horn player in Max Rebo's band, while also occasionally acting as the in-suit actor for bounty hunter Boba Fett when the other in-suit actor Jeremy Bulloch wasn't around. But yeah, because the scene at the bar was filmed on an actual set with all of these people, as opposed to being surrounded by a sea of green screen like they usually are, actor Hayden Christensen loved this scene in particular because it felt like being in a real club with his homie Obi-Wan. Homie-Wan Kenobi. And speaking of Obi-Wan, while Anakin's bearded bro is blending in amongst the bar patrons, one sketchy-ass dude attempts to sell him some death sticks, with this guy being played by actor Matt Doran, who also played the character Mouse in the first Matrix film. And for all we know, this entire movie could be taking place in a Matrix simulation made by Mouse himself due to actress Fiona Johnson playing a female bar patron in a red dress, much like she did when she played a woman in a red dress programmed to distract Neo in the first Matrix movie as well. Like, George Lucas clearly was a big fan of The Matrix when it came out in 1999, and who wasn't? That movie freaking bangs, man. Paul actually did a really great breakdown of the first Matrix movie that you guys can find on this channel right here. But yeah, in the Star Wars universe, death sticks are a type of highly addictive drug that, when used, give the user a powerful hallucinogenic high. The effects are short-lived, but come at a steep cost. Death sticks not only warp a person's mind, but also deteriorate their body over time. And prolonged use leads to severe physical degradation and mental instability, making them one of the more dangerous substances in the galaxy. The high might feel good at the moment, but the long-term consequences are devastating, essentially shaving time off one's life every time they use one of these death sticks. And George Lucas created these death sticks as a clear metaphor for cigarette smoking and, more broadly, substance abuse, as Lucas was very staunchly against cigarette smoking and drug use in general. And by inserting this brief scene, Lucas was trying to slip in a moral message about the dangers of addiction in children, as he primarily made the Star Wars franchise for them.
Won't somebody please think of the children?
But yeah, Zam attempts to sneak behind Obi-Wan Kenobi to shoot him in the back, but Obi-Wan is able to detect her intentions through the Force and is able to cut her arm off with his lightsaber just in time. This, of course, would not be the first time we ever saw Obi-Wan cutting off somebody's limb in a bar in a Star Wars movie, as Sir Alec Guinness's Obi-Wan would do the same thing to the Aqualish alien Ponda Baba in a cantina in A New Hope. But unfortunately, before the Jedi could get any information out of her, Zam would be shot with a toxic dart by Jango Fett. And as she lay on the ground dying, Zam the Changeling morphs back into her regular form as a clawed-eyed alien before using her last breaths to cuss out Jango Fett, saying "bounty hunter slimeball" in both the Clawdite and Huttese languages. Her skin also turns a shade of brown in the process, which is not usually her normal skin color, as Clawdites typically have green skin. And with nothing but this toxic dart as their lead, Obi-Wan and Anakin report the attack to the Jedi Council, who then resolve to let Obi-Wan track down the origin of the dart, while Anakin takes Senator Padme back to Naboo undercover as refugees. In the 10 years since the events of The Phantom Menace, the Jedi High Council has changed a little bit with two new members, Jedi Masters Shaak Ti and Coleman Trebor. Shaak Ti is a member of the Togrutan race of aliens, the same species as Anakin's future Padawan Ahsoka Tano. She would actually prove absolutely instrumental to the Clone Wars by working with two highly trained bounty hunters in training all the Jango Fett clones at the Kamino cloning facility in the art of synchronized warfare, choosing only the most skilled clones of the bunch to serve on the front lines. And this is all covered in Season 3, Episode 1 of the Clone Wars animated series, in case you guys wanted to check that out. Coleman Trebor, on the other hand, is a member of the Verk alien race, whose heads resemble the Parasaurolophus dinosaur. And unfortunately for him, this would be his first and last appearance in a Star Wars movie, due to him being slain by Jango Fett later on in the movie during the Battle of Geonosis. Coleman Trebor would take the seat of former High Council member Yariel Poof. You know, that one Jedi Master who looks like a big old Caucasian penis. Yeah, that guy. And while we don't know exactly what happened in canon to him as of yet, we do know that he died on a Jedi mission not long before the events of Attack of the Clones. Shaak Ti, on the other hand, would fill in the seat of the late Jedi Master Yaddle, the only member of Yoda's race that we've seen in the Star Wars universe outside of Grogu. We would not learn how Yaddle died until the year 2022, when the 4th episode of Tales of the Jedi was released on Disney+. Apparently, not long after the murder of Qui-Gon Jinn 10 years prior, Master Yaddle would be struck down by Qui-Gon Jinn's former master, Count Dooku, mostly because Yaddle discovered Count Dooku's alliance with Darth Sidious. So, in order to prove his loyalty to his new master, Dooku had to strike Yaddle down. But yeah, other than those two, we of course have Yoda, who has served as Jedi Grandmaster for around 800 years, the 50-year-old human Jedi Master Mace Windu from the planet Harum Kal, the Kaldor Jedi Master Plo Koon, the Syrian Jedi Master Kiadi Mundi, the horned Iktachi Jedi Saci Tin, the small Lannic Jedi Evan Piel, the snake-like Jedi Master Oppo Rensisis of the Thespiation species, the Thalofian Jedi Master Adi Gallia, the Zabrak Jedi Master Eth Koth, and the human Master Depa Balaba from the planet Chalakta. In order to convince Padme to leave Coruscant, the Jedi have Anakin talk with Chancellor Palpatine, who proceeds to blow up Anakin's ego by telling him that the Jedi Council does not fully appreciate his abilities and how he's going to be the best Jedi who ever lived. A fantastic manipulation tactic to use on someone like Anakin, who keeps feeling like the Jedi are holding him back. And this is then very appropriately followed by a conversational scene between Obi-Wan, Yoda, and Mace Windu, where Obi-Wan expresses concern over Anakin's growing arrogance and his naturally strong connection to the Force. Because Anakin's blood is jam-packed with a crazy amount of midichlorians, he's able to achieve impossible feats that dwarf many of those on the Jedi Council with ease. So Anakin's wondering why the hell he's still rocking a Padawan braid on his head and not regularly being given S-rank ninja missions like Kakashi gets to do. However, even though he has the abilities of an exceptional Jedi, Obi-Wan Kenobi believes that Anakin is still far too impulsive, emotional, arrogant, obsessive, and naive to become a full-fledged Jedi Knight just yet. And Obi-Wan is right here. We literally see Anakin display all those emotions at once as he talks to Padme as she packs to head back to Naboo.
That must be frustrating.
It's worse. He's overly critical. He never listens. He doesn't understand.
Like, dude was having a regular conversation with Padme before he got himself incredibly angry over how much his power wasn't being recognized by his superiors. And while I understand Anakin's frustration, that dude yelling, "It's not fair," like a 4-year-old before telling this super hot Padme lady that he's all grown up now was absolutely insane work. And if I'm honest, all of Anakin's actions throughout this movie is just one giant red flag. Like, dude is a grade A mentally unstable, predatory creep in this movie, and I, to this day, cannot understand what Padme saw in him. I feel like Anakin did one giant Force mind trick by accident and got Padme to fall in love with him. But yeah, what I love the most about this conversation between Obi-Wan, Yoda, and Mace Windu is how Yoda is the one who clearly sees that Anakin isn't the only one amongst their order that struggles with being arrogant in their abilities, suggesting that even the oldest Jedi amongst them in the Council have a tendency to let their Force affinity lead them into overconfidence and conceit. And Yoda is 100% on the money here, as it would be the Jedi's arrogance that would blind the Jedi Order from seeing how their own dark-sided fear of the dark side would transform them into soldiers and spies rather than the peacekeeping monks their creed originally called them to be. And while Anakin and Padme head to Naboo, Obi-Wan Kenobi begins his investigation at Dex's Diner, owned by his old four-armed Basilic's pal, Dexter Jetster, with Jetster being one of the nicknames that George Lucas had for his son, Jet Lucas. During the scene, we could see that Dexter has 2 waitresses under his employ. This blonde waitress over here named Hermione Bagua, aka Harmony, played by Australian actress Susie Porter, and this WA7 waitress droid named Flo, just like it says in Aurebesh on her name tag. Flo is also voiced by the same Harmony actress Susie Porter, because let's be real, most waitresses be having 2 jobs. George Lucas would name this waitress Flo as a shout out to his good buddy Martin Scorsese, who directed a film called Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore in 1974 that would spin off into a TV show called Alice, which ran from 1976 to 1985. And on that show is a character named Flo Castleberry, who George Lucas would take that name from. Dexter Jetster's personality in this movie was also partly inspired by a character from the Alice TV program, mainly actor Vic Tayback's chef character Mel. George Lucas has also said that classic American actor Ernest Borgnine was also an influence on Dexter Jetster as well. And while Dexter Jetster is introduced as Obi-Wan's old friend, he is also an incredibly old alien himself, and was even around during the days of the High Republic hundreds of years in the past. So he was definitely around in the galaxy during the events of The Acolyte on Disney+. doing space hood rat stuff with his friends. Back in the days of the High Republic, Dexter used to be a hyperspace prospector, one of the many galactic adventurers scoping out the untraveled galaxy for new hyperspace routes. And while he wasn't doing that, he was either dealing goods on the black market or telling all sorts of stories to Maz Kanata and all of her sketchy pirate and smuggler friends over at Maz Kanata's castle on Takodana, which we saw Han Solo and the gang visit in The Force Awakens. In Kirsten White's 2022 book Padawan, we learned that Obi-Wan first met Dexter while Obi-Wan was protecting a group of children on a Jedi mission to the planet Lunara, helping Obi-Wan and those kids evacuate that dying planet to find refuge in the city planet Coruscant, where Dex would open up his diner shortly after. But yeah, Dexter helps Obi-Wan identify the toxic dart as the Kaminoan saber dart, leading to Obi-Wan attempting to look up more about the planet Kamino in the Jedi archives, the Jedi's massive library of galactic knowledge and philosophy managed by the chief librarian, Jedi Master Jocasta Nu, played by actress Alethea McGrath, who unfortunately passed away in 2016. Around the Jedi archive are 20 busts, representing the lost 20 Jedi from the past who decided to leave the Jedi Order for their own different reasons. But what's particularly notable about these statues is how the VFX team apparently threw in statues of some key figures from the production, including director George Lucas, visual effects supervisors John Noel and Pablo Hellman, as well as animation director Rob Coleman. And there's actually a deleted scene from this movie where Jocasta and Obi-Wan stand next to the bust of former Jedi Count Dooku while discussing how he became fed up with the doctrine of the Jedi and the inefficiencies of the Senate before he left the Order himself.
He has a very powerful face, doesn't he? He was one of the most brilliant Jedi I've had the privilege of knowing.
I never understood why he quit.
Well, one might say he was always a bit out of step with the decisions of the Council. Much like your old master, Qui-Gon Jinn.
Really?
Oh, yes, they were very individual thinkers. Idealists. In the end, I think he left because he lost faith in the Republic. He disappeared for 9 of 10 years and turned up recently as head of the separatist movement.
But speaking of Count Dooku, before Sir Christopher Lee would end up being cast as the character for the prequels, he was actually almost cast as a completely different character in the original trilogy, as Lee would actually turn down the role of Grand Moff Tarkin in A New Hope when Lucas offered it to him, something that Christopher Lee would grow to regret greatly over the years as Star Wars grew into cinematic legend. So, when Lucas called him for Dooku, Lee just couldn't refuse. But yeah, as Padme and Anakin are being transported to Naboo as stowaways in an AA freighter liner called the Genderian Valley, R2-D2 brings the two of them food because he's the robo-homie that every Skywalker needs. The robot actually serving the food to all of these refugees is actually a COO 2180 cooking droid, who also likely prepared the food themselves. And this droid was apparently going to appear inside of Dex's diner earlier on in the film, but they decided to use him here instead. And as the two talk, Anakin tells Padme that the Jedi Code only forbids attachment and possession, and tries to argue that the Jedi's unconditional compassion for all life is enough to excuse his deep feelings for the Senator. Padme then replies to this by telling Anakin that he's grown so much over the past 10 years. And yeah, I would hope so, Padme. It's so weird how the audience is just supposed to believe that Anakin is supposed to be 7 years younger than Padme here, like he was in The Phantom Menace, but like Hayden Christensen is a full 2 months older than Natalie Portman is in real life. So I have no idea what George Lucas was thinking, to be honest. But hey, out of the 400 people that auditioned for the role of Anakin, Hayden apparently looked the best alongside Natalie Portman. So George still thought your boy was still perfect for the role regardless. Then we transition to Obi-Wan walking around the Jedi Temple as he walks past the blue Twi'lek Jedi Aayla Secura, who was actually played by one of the production assistants from Industrial Light and Magic named Amy Allen. And her appearances in Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith are her only major acting roles to date. And even though Amy Allen has no speaking lines in this movie, it was important for George Lucas that Aayla Secura canonically have a French accent, specifically because George wanted her to represent the World War II French resistance fighters in his giant war allegory of a space film. So when voice actress Jennifer Hale took up the role of Aayla for the Clone Wars animated series, Lucas made sure that Hale established that French accent into canon. And when the production was first attempting to nail down what Aayla Secura would look like, concept art was made of Aayla that made her look way more of an aquatic type alien. But that design would ultimately be repurposed for the design of the Nautolan species of alien that Jedi Master Kit Fisto belongs to. But yeah, as Obi-Wan walks past Master Aayla, he also walks by this giant statue of a Jedi with a top knot, making a sphere float in midair, which is kind of crazy because how the hell did they make that statue ball float in the air like that? It's kind of weird. This statue seems like a clear tribute to William Shakespeare's Hamlet. You know, when Hamlet famously holds the skull of the character Yorick with an outstretched arm. And that iconic piece of imagery is oftentimes associated with the famous Hamlet quote, "To be or not to be, that is the question." Personally, I feel like George Lucas intentionally wanted the audience to have both that iconic pose and quote in their heads for the current scene. Because this to be or not to be question is the question that Obi-Wan would ask Yoda in regards to his mysterious invisible planet Kamino. Does Kamino exist or doesn't it exist? Like honestly, it could be Obi-Wan as this statue rather than this mysterious Jedi, who actually looks a lot like Jedi Master Sifo Dyas, the very first Jedi to make contact with Kamino in order to make a clone army for the Republic. This Sifo Dyas dude apparently had a vision from the cosmic force about an upcoming war in the galaxy, and after suggesting to the Jedi Council that they encourage the Senate to assemble an army to fight what's to come, all the council did was expel him from the council for his insane and radical idea. So, about a year before the events of the Phantom Menace, Sifo Dyas would go behind their backs and contact the aliens of Kamino to start building an army of clones anyway, pretending like he was speaking on behalf of the entire Galactic Senate and Jedi Council. But eventually, Darth Sidious and his apprentice Darth Tyrannus, aka Count Dooku, would find out about Sifo Dyas' plans to build a clone army, and since they are both terrible people, they would ultimately kill Sifo Dyas and take his operation for themselves not long after the events of the invasion of Naboo. With the Kamino cloning contract now in Sith control, Count Dooku would then buy the rights to Jango Fett's DNA for 20 million credits to have that DNA be the base code for this clone army. All Jango Fett asked for in return was to have a young clone of himself made to be his son, because apparently Jango wasn't getting any bitches. Which of course led to the creation of the bounty hunter Boba Fett from the original trilogy. But again, since this happened not long after episode 1, this young Boba Fett appears to be 10 years old in this film, played by actor Daniel Logan. So yeah, I said all this to say that it makes a lot of sense for George Lucas to make Sifo Dyas look a lot like the statue during this scene about finding Kamino with Yoda's class of younglings. And speaking of the younglings, when the younglings say hi to Obi-Wan during the scene, the fourth youngling to the right is actually named Liam, after Qui-Gon Jinn actor Liam Neeson. The class then helps Obi-Wan realize that the planet Kamino was deleted from the Jedi archives by a mysterious force, a force that we would learn to be Count Dooku himself in the 4th episode of Tales of the Jedi back in 2022. Which Count Dooku would do using Sifo Dyas' security clearance credentials.
Please enter security clearance code. Code accepted. Master Sifo Dyas. Planet Kamino. Kamino. Location deleted.
And as Obi-Wan makes his way to where Kamino should be in the galaxy, Anakin and Padme arrive on Naboo. And as their ship flies over the Naboo spaceport, we can actually see that the VFX team has placed 3 YT-1300 Corellian freighters in the background, a direct reference to the iconic Millennium Falcon from the original trilogy, flown by Han Solo, a man who hails from the planet Corellia himself. And as Anakin and Padme make their way to Queen Jamila's chambers, Padme reflects on her own time as queen, confessing that she was relieved when her 2 terms as queen was over because she felt too young and inexperienced to actually be queen, even going as far as rejecting an effort by the people of Naboo to amend their constitution to let her serve even longer. Like, I love this about Padme because this is the exact opposite of how Anakin is in this movie and beyond. Because Anakin pursues power and status and is blind to his own immaturity, while Padme rejects power and status and is mindful of her levels of wisdom and maturity. And as the two have this conversation, they walk past 2 Gungans having a conversation in Naboo-type clothing, showing how interconnected the Naboo and Gungans have truly become after breaking down the barriers between their people 10 years prior. And much like in The Phantom Menace, the interior of Queen Jamila's chambers was filmed at the Royal Palace of Caserta in Italy, as well as the later balcony scene where Anakin and Padme share that first kiss. And I do want to point out that during this kissing scene, after Padme shares with Anakin how much she valued the beautiful nature and scenery of Naboo as a child, Anakin immediately replies to all that with his iconic, "I hate sand, it's coarse and it gets everywhere" remark, again showing a sharp contrast between how the two of them see life.
What a baby. What a big baby. Just get on with the game. Baby.
Much like Qui-Gon tried to impart on a young 10-year-old Anakin in the last movie, Padme is focused on the living force and can appreciate the natural beauty around her, while Anakin, on the other hand, cannot even stay present enough to focus on what she was even talking about, instead choosing to focus on the negative aspect of nature before quickly changing the subject to how soft Padme's skin was. Like if Qui-Gon Jinn was alive, he would be shaking his head furiously at this little dumb Anakin boy. To me, this reflects how much Anakin is obsessed with Padme's physical form and the idea of possessing her body for his future, rather than actually listening to the woman that he apparently loves for who she is. And unfortunately, Anakin would never learn the error of his ways, which would lead him to ignoring Padme's pleas on Mustafar and force choking her when she threatens to leave him. And Padme would continue to miss red flag after red flag when she would totally disregard how jealous Anakin would immediately get when she talked about her childhood crush briefly, and how Anakin basically advocated for a fascist empire instead of a galactic republic. But the thing that annoys me the most about their whole date is how Anakin would manipulate Padme later on by placing the blame on her for their earlier kiss. Being all like, "Nah, you should have never kissed me because now I really can't live without you. So if you reject me, I'm gonna feel really bad and you're gonna hurt my feelings real bad and you're gonna feel real bad about hurting my feelings." Like a real asshole move that was meant to pressure Padme into committing to him. But yeah, a few other things that I do want to know about their date is how George Lucas allowed the two actors to completely improvise the dialogue in that dinner scene. You know, when they were talking about aggressive Jedi negotiations. And also how apparently Lucas himself personally drew up the design for the outfit Padme wears during their fireside conversation. A little later, Anakin's midichlorians would plague him with visions from the cosmic force of his mother in pain, leading Padme to accompany Anakin on a quick trip to Tatooine to check up on her, prioritizing his attachments over the Jedi code that he swore to uphold. But then again, he was like 10 years old when he took that oath, so can he really be blamed for that? Why are the Jedi making children take these oaths? That's not really fair. When the two arrive on Naboo, Anakin quickly tracks down his old slave master Watto. After coming out on top after Anakin's win at the Boonta Eve pod race a decade ago, this dude would press his luck a little bit too much by gambling even more, leading him to lose his junk shop and pretty much everything, leaving him on the side of the streets covered in flies. The sound of these flies around Watto was actually an audio recording of horseshit. Literally, it's actual horseshit. Well, flies flying around horseshit anyway at the Skywalker Ranch, which is absolutely crazy to me because who sees horseshit and is immediately like, "Hold up, let me grab my microphone. This moment is too good to miss out on." A psychopath, that's who. But anyways, after Watto realizes that the Jedi confronting him is actually a grown-up Anakin, he tells Anakin that 5 years after Anakin left, he was forced to give Shmi Skywalker to a man named Klieg Lars in order to pay off some debts. And after meeting Anakin's mother as a slave and falling in love with her, Klieg Lars would win Shmi's freedom in a gamble with Watto, much like Qui-Gon did with Anakin. Anakin and Padme then head to the Lars homestead and tell R2-D2 to stay behind on Padme's H-type Nubian yacht so that R2 doesn't break Star Wars canon by accident, because at that time, R2-D2 had not yet met Luke's future uncle, Owen Lars, who Anakin meets when he arrives at the Lars house after reuniting with C-3PO, with actor Anthony Daniels stepping back into the suit for the first time since the original trilogy, as the C-3PO from The Phantom Menace was actually just a puppet. Daniels would actually literally step back into the suit, as the C-3PO suit in this movie is actually the very same C-3PO suit that they used in the original trilogy, just a little bit repainted. And living with Owen Lars is actually a young Beru Whiteson, his girlfriend. It was actually Beru herself who introduced Anakin's mother to Owen's father, Klieg. And in the years since Shmi Skywalker's freedom, both her and Beru worked as hard as they could to free as many slaves on Tatooine as they could find, with Shmi even developing a way to disable the explosive slave tracking chip that was commonly embedded inside every slave to keep them in line Suicide Squad style. But unfortunately, a month before Anakin's arrival, his mother would be attacked by Tusken Raiders, just like her grandson Luke Skywalker would in A New Hope. Tusken Raiders would frequently attack other people outside of their species because they viewed themselves as having the most legitimate claim to the Tatooine planet, as they themselves were one of the few species of alien that were actually native to Tatooine. Tusken Raiders also had a strong belief that all of the water on Tatooine is sacred and that they alone have claims to all that high-quality H2O. Which, of course, is real bad news if you are the wife of a moisture farmer like Anakin's mom was when she was picking mushrooms off of one of her family's moisture evaporators. It was actually George Lucas's original intention to eventually reveal that it was Count Dooku himself that would order these Tusken Raiders to kidnap Anakin's mother. And there was even a deleted scene in Revenge of the Sith where Count Dooku confesses to doing so. However, George Lucas would ultimately decide to not include that scene in the movie, likely because it would insinuate that Count Dooku was actively working to help Darth Sidious find his own replacement, which really wouldn't make sense for Dooku to do. But yeah, 26 out of 29 of Klieg Lar's friends died in an attempt to free Shmi, with Klieg himself barely escaping with his life after losing one of his legs. And knowing that he had the strength and skill of at least 26 men, Anakin decides that he's going to go out by himself to search for his mother. And before he leaves, Padme follows Anakin outside to say goodbye, with the camera focusing primarily on their shadows. And during this moment, Anakin's shadow is purposely designed to look like Darth Vader's, foreshadowing a coming tragedy that would be a main motivator towards Anakin's descent to the dark side. Anakin then hops on a speeder and heads straight to the camp of Tusken Raiders, getting help from a group of Jawas on the way. And when Anakin arrives at the Tusken Raider camp, two lizard dogs can be seen fighting over a bone outside. These dog-like reptilian creatures are actually called massiffs, and they are typically found on desert-type planets like Tatooine or Geonosis. In fact, these creatures were originally supposed to fight Obi-Wan while he was attempting to infiltrate Dooku's operation on Geonosis, but George Lucas decided against that and decided to just have them fighting over a bone on Tatooine here. And speaking of animals and Tusken Raiders, the reason why Tusken Raiders of Star Wars sound like donkeys or mules is because that is exactly what they are. Well, kind of. Because all of the scenes in Tatooine were filmed in Tunisia during A New Hope, the crew had to use donkeys and mules to help lug around all of their equipment. However, that meant a lot of donkeys and mules in the background making all sorts of annoying noises, especially when they were trying to film, resulting in a bunch of takes being ruined by a bunch of asses. But the audio engineers did see an opportunity in all of this chaos, and would record these sounds for the Tusken Raiders, making the best out of this shitty situation. But yeah, although Anakin was able to free his mother from her bonds, the injuries that she sustained after being tortured by the Sand People only allowed her enough time and energy to say goodbye to him before her death. And with one of Anakin's greatest fears now a reality, young Skywalker begins a crash out of galactic proportions, murdering all the Tusken Raiders in the camp. And not just the men, but the women and the children and their little dogs too. And during this violent descent to the dark side, we can actually hear Qui-Gon Jinn's voice echoing in the background, begging Anakin to stop, an intentional audio cue put there by George Lucas to show Qui-Gon Jinn reaching out from the great beyond that is the cosmic force. Much like a young Luke Skywalker would be able to hear the voice of a deceased Obi-Wan Kenobi in the original trilogy. And it's actually super sad to think about how disappointed Qui-Gon Jinn was in Anakin's dark side massacre in that moment. But the fact that Qui-Gon was moved enough to reach out to Anakin like that at all shows how deeply of a faithful follower of the living force that Qui-Gon actually was, as he cared so much about the lives of those barbaric Tusken Raiders enough to try to speak on their behalf. Because to Qui-Gon, all life is sacred. And this moment is actually briefly touched upon in E.K. Johnston's Star Wars A Queen's Hope from 2022, which shows Anakin expressing guilt about purposely ignoring Qui-Gon as he was slaughtering all of those Sand People. And the fact that Anakin could even hear Qui-Gon calling to him at all shows how diesel Anakin's midichlorian count even is. Because thousands upon thousands of those mini satellite dishes in his bloodstream were able to pick up those signals from the cosmic force with literally no effort. This is also why Master Yoda is able to detect Anakin's intensely angry emotions from light years away on the planet Coruscant, as Yoda is the member of the Jedi Council with the second highest midichlorian count that anyone has ever seen. Anakin then heads back to the Lars homestead to bring back his mother's body, and when Padme goes to check up on Anakin afterwards, we see him in the Lars garage attempting to fix some of their broken machinery, an emotional response from Anakin, who is seeking some type of control in the midst of his anguish. Because at his core, Anakin is a mechanic at heart. Ever since he was a small kid, Anakin has used his natural midichlorian connection to the cosmic force to allow him to build impressive race-winning pod racers and protocol droids with relative ease. It's because of this that Anakin gets so angry at Obi-Wan Kenobi for quote-unquote holding him back in his Jedi training, because Anakin feels like if the cosmic force can help him fix up and bring life to machinery like C-3PO, then he should be able to use that cosmic force to fix organic life forms as well and keep them from dying. However, such a feat clearly goes against the natural laws of the universe, which the light-sided Jedi code strongly aligns with, because much like the stars themselves, everything is born and goes through changes before everything eventually dies. Anakin hates the very universal concepts of change and death and begins to rage against the dying of the light, wanting everyone that he loves to be as immortal as the darkness of outer space, rather than being temporary like the stars themselves. Because no matter what happens to the stars and planets in the universe, darkness always survives and is eternal, which is why Anakin would see training in the unnaturally mysterious ways of the dark side of the Force. Because as cold and empty as cosmic darkness can be, it will always survive. But unfortunately for both Anakin and Palpatine, they would learn much too late in life that the unnatural pursuit of eternal life would cost their actual lives to be ones of deep suffering, as both of their actions would lead them to immense suffering to the point of relying on technology to sustain them. And as Anakin expresses his deep anger and frustrations to Padme, he angrily throws an object into the back of the garage, hitting what appears to be the same X-34 landspeeder that his son Luke Skywalker would end up riding with Obi-Wan during A New Hope. And after they bury Anakin's mother, R2-D2 shows up super briefly in order to tell Anakin Skywalker that they have a missed video call from Obi-Wan Kenobi, who has been on a bit of an adventure of his own. Obi-Wan would eventually find the planet of Kamino, exactly where we're supposed to be in space. Kamino is home to the amphibious Kaminoan species, who have chosen to isolate themselves from the rest of the galaxy as a whole out of deep mistrust, believing that the planet itself was all they needed to sustain their culture and livelihood, and that outside help was just a means of colonizers trying to get their foot in the door. Their design was heavily inspired by classic depictions of aliens in cinema, in particular the aliens from Steven Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind. This would be the second prequel movie that would introduce an alien species inspired by one of Spielberg's movies, as The Phantom Menace introduced the Asogian species as a direct tribute to Spielberg's 1982 film E.T. the Extraterrestrial. To help the Kaminoans travel around their planet, they would ride on the backs of flying whales called Awas. The designs for these creatures were actually created to be used on the planet Bespin when the OG gang traveled there in The Empire Strikes Back, originally intended to be Bespin air whales, which is why the word Awa, spelled A-I-W-H-A, seems to be a combination of the word air and whale. After the Kaminoan Tanwi introduces Obi-Wan to their Prime Minister Lama Su, he learns about how former Jedi Master Sifo Dyas was the one who originally ordered for the creation of a clone army. And this moment in the movie is actually the result of a typo in the script, as the name Sifo Dyas was originally supposed to be Sido Dyas, with a D instead of an F. The original implication was that Darth Sidious himself was the one who originally contacted the Kaminoans for this clone army, as Sido Dyas is supposed to be a play on the word Sidious. But because of this typo, they had to create a whole separate character with a backstory that would not be expounded upon until the Clone Wars animated series. Obi-Wan also eventually learns that all the clones were programmed to be significantly more docile and obedient than their genetic father Jango Fett, with such programming eventually being used to trigger the Great Jedi Massacre with the Order 66 program. And as Obi-Wan inspects the clone army, we can see that the design of the clone troopers' armor is a mashup of both the white stormtrooper armor from the original trilogy with that of the Mandalorian armor of the Fett family. Most of the clones in this movie are equipped with a DC-15A blaster rifle, with the designs of these sci-fi rifles being inspired by the MG-34 machine gun that the Germans used in World War II while singing Kanye West songs from 2025 for some reason. Are the Germans time travelers? I don't know, but that last Indiana Jones movie appears to say yes. And considering that we first learned about the Clone Wars in A New Hope when Luke Skywalker would ask an old Ben Kenobi if he served in the Clone Wars, it's quite crazy that it would be Obi-Wan Kenobi himself who would be the first Jedi to actually lay eyes on the completed clone army. And what's even crazier is how this wasn't even George Lucas's original vision for what the Clone Wars was going to look like. Initially, George Lucas was thinking that the Clone Wars was going to involve a massive galactic war where everyone in the galaxy was forced to fight against their own evil clone, which honestly would have been incredibly cool to see, and I would love if they tackled such a story for Star Wars Visions on Disney Plus someday. Obi-Wan eventually meets Jango Fett and his cloned son Boba Fett, who each share a secret language that they use between each other called Fett code. Like when Jango is talking to Obi-Wan, he uses their special Fett code language in order to tell Boba Fett to close the closet door. In fact, that coded sentence is literally just the sentence "close the door" said backwards. And after Jango lies through Obi-Wan's interrogation, he immediately starts preparing his son to leave Kamino for the planet Geonosis. Obi-Wan then gives chase, leading to a really fun hand-to-hand sequence between the two of them, a type of fight that wasn't really all that common in the Star Wars franchise up until that point. Eventually, Jango is able to leave Obi-Wan dangling for his life on the edge of a platform, allowing for him to escape in his Slave One ship, the modified Fire Spray 31 class patrol and attack craft famously flown by Boba Fett in the original trilogy. Before Boba Fett inherited the ship from his father, Jango actually stole the ship from a prison moon called Uru 4. As Jango Fett enters his ship, he bumps his head a little bit, a nod to the famous blooper from A New Hope, where a stormtrooper accidentally bumps his head on an opening door. And after throwing a tracker onto Jango Fett's ship, Obi-Wan eventually gives chase in his own red Delta 7B Ether Sprite class light interceptor with his astromech companion R4-P17, an astromech that is apparently female. And in order to shake Obi-Wan, Jango Fett would then release some of his Void 7 seismic charges, giving us one of the most satisfying sound effects in cinema history. Go ahead and play that beautiful symphony for the kids, editors. Seismic charges work by absorbing all of the sound around them before releasing all of that energy in a massive blast, kind of like vibranium in Wakanda in the MCU. And it's a sound that Benjamin Burt, the movie's sound designer, wanted to include in the Star Wars universe as early as A New Hope, when he originally suggested that they use the sound for when TIE fighters were destroyed in outer space. However, George Lucas would not approve of the use of this sound until this very movie. The original goal was to try to make a sound that resembled, quote-unquote, an audio black hole. And I gotta say, that dude succeeded. Play that shit on my funeral, man. But yeah, eventually Jango would go on the offensive and chase Obi-Wan, leading to Obi-Wan faking his death by throwing some junk in the path of one of Jango Fett's missiles before hiding behind a space rock. Obi-Wan hiding amongst the chaos of an asteroid field is a callback to when Han Solo did the same in The Empire Strikes Back, but this time, Obi-Wan actually avoids detection by Jango Fett, unlike a Han Solo who was ultimately found by the bounty hunter Boba Fett. In fact, it was because little boy Boba saw his dad fail at playing asteroid hide-and-seek with Obi-Wan that he was wise enough to find Han Solo hiding amongst some asteroids later on in Episode 5, which is a really clever way to connect those two moments. Obi-Wan eventually tracks Jango down to Geonosis and ends up spying on Count Dooku's meeting with all the major heads of the CIS army. And during this meeting, notice how the table that they are sitting at is shaped like the logo for the Galactic Republic. Apparently, the set for this scene was originally supposed to be a conference room for Chancellor Palpatine over on the planet Coruscant. However, George Lucas would change his mind about including this Coruscant conference room in the movie, leading to the production deciding to reuse this set for this CIS meeting on the planet Geonosis. But even though this was a last-minute change, I still do feel like it's quite fitting considering that Count Dooku himself was responsible for the creation of the Republic's droid army. So having Count Dooku sit at the head of this Republic-themed table with all of his CIS buddies surrounding it kind of accidentally reinforces the theme of Dooku secretly being in charge of this entire galactic conflict. And after learning that Count Dooku was working with the Trade Federation, the Geonosians, the Techno Union, the Commerce Guild, and the Corporate Alliance to create a droid army, Obi-Wan attempts to send a message of warning to the Jedi Council, but is attacked in the middle of that recording before he is ultimately captured by Count Dooku. When the character of Count Dooku was first imagined, they were originally going to be a female dark side user, specifically designed to act as a thematic dark opposite to Natalie Portman's Padme Amidala, which is why one of the first versions of the concept art would use Padme's face as a primary reference. A later piece of concept art would then evolve this female Dooku's look to include golden yellow skin and super long flowing strands of hair, very much inspired by the mythical figure Medusa, which honestly would have been super rad. Then Dooku's design would eventually evolve to feature her with a bald head, turtleneck, and curved lightsabers, a design that would ultimately end up being used for Dooku's apprentice, Asajj Ventress. The production was so indecisive about what to do with Dooku that they even envisioned this female Dooku as a kick-ass chrome cyborg. And I gotta say, I am a big fan of that design personally. Like, I really do wish that they adapt this design at some point because I really do think it would work as a really kick-ass villain. But then eventually George Lucas decided that he wanted a much older Dooku, so concept artists started drawing some old Sith women until the sex of the character would be swapped when Christopher Lee was signed on to the movie. With Obi-Wan now in captivity and slowly spinning like a rotisserie chicken at Costco, Count Dooku begins to tell Obi-Wan that the Senate was being controlled by a Dark Lord named Darth Sidious, and that if he and Obi-Wan teamed up, they would be strong enough to overthrow him.
You must join me, Obi-Wan. And together, we will destroy the Sith.
That line by Count Dooku is of course a direct reference to the moment from The Empire Strikes Back when Darth Vader makes a similar offer to Luke Skywalker.
Join me, and together we can rule the galaxy as father and son.
Obi-Wan immediately dismisses this idea by saying that the Jedi would have been able to detect the presence of the Sith's growing influence, yet another demonstration of how arrogant the Jedi have become in their own mastery of the ways of the Force, a major flaw that would lead to their undoing in the following movie. Obi-Wan's beard during this scene is 100% fake, by the way, as the production shot this scene as a part of a series of reshoots. And at the time, Ewan McGregor was starring in the classic feel-good family adventure film of 2001 called Black Hawk Down. I remember watching this on Nick Jr. as a child. It was my favorite memory, right after Blue's Clues. His character, U.S. Army Ranger John Grimes, did not have a lot of hair on his head due to the nature of the role. So, when he was called for reshoots for Attack of the Clones, the makeup team was forced to make a prosthetic beard and wig. Obi-Wan's fake hair could also be seen during Obi-Wan's conversation with Yoda and Mace Windu, as well as Obi-Wan's elevator conversation with Anakin at the very start of the film. After their conversation, we are immediately brought to the Senate building on Coruscant, and outside of the Senate building, we can see a series of statues along the sides of the Avenue of the Core Founders, with each of these statues depicting the very founders of the Galactic Republic, much like the statues in Chancellor Palpatine's office. And after getting Obi-Wan's message, Palpatine manages to manipulate interim Senator Jar Jar Dingus into giving him the emergency powers to greenlight the Senate's use of the clone army without getting tied up in political debates, setting the Galactic Republic on a dangerous road to fascism. You gotta love when the Senate does absolutely nothing when a career con man abuses executive orders to secure power for himself. It's one of my favorite things in life. I want more of that. Meanwhile, Anakin and Padme head to Geonosis after getting Obi-Wan's message, eventually making their way to the Geonosians droid factory, where he and Padme end up fighting for their lives after falling on some dangerous conveyor belts. This scene was also part of the reshoot process and was added into the movie because George Lucas wanted a little bit more suspense added to keep the audience engaged. During the sequence, Anakin's right arm gets pinned underneath some of the assembling machinery, foreshadowing how that same right arm would be replaced by a robotic arm by movie's end. Anakin's lightsaber would also be sliced in two by one of the mechanical cutting arms, leaving Anakin defenseless. That lightsaber is actually based on Darth Vader's Sith lightsaber from the original trilogy. It's literally the same design, but with a chrome tip. And during rehearsals, Hayden Christensen would absentmindedly make the lightsaber whooshing noise when swinging his saber around, which is hilarious considering that Ewan McGregor did the same thing on the set of The Phantom Menace when he first started filming with his lightsaber. But unfortunately, Anakin and Padme would be captured by Jango Fett and a squad of Geonosians. But speaking of the Geonosians, when coming up with the design for these alien creatures, George Lucas would refer to some old concept art that they made for the Nemoidian race for The Phantom Menace, because originally the Nemoidians were supposed to look a lot like organic versions of the Trade Federation battle droids. George Lucas then took that look and combined it with the appearance of termites, as George Lucas was dealing with his own termite infestation in his home at the time. Before Anakin and Padme are led out to be chained up and eaten, Padme confesses her deep love for Anakin in the single most unearned romance in cinema history. To be that deeply in love with someone who has shown himself to be extremely obsessive, possessive, and codependent that quickly is absolute madness. But hey, Luke and Leia gotta be born somehow, I guess, so whatever. Like, this moment is so nonsensical that I've always held a personal headcanon that Anakin may have accidentally used his super strong connection to the Force to influence Padme to fall in love with him. Almost like a Jedi mind trick, but with emotions. I mean, the Force and emotions are tightly linked, so it is possible, but the implications of that might be a little bit too dark for either George Lucas or Disney to ever actually reveal. Because that would mean Padme did a whole lot of stuff without her true consent, which is not okay. But anyways, watching Padme and Anakin get chained up alongside Obi-Wan is Count Dooku and his Geonosian colleague Archduke Poggle the Lesser, the public representative and leader of the Geonosian race. I mean, Poggle isn't the true leader of the Geonosians, as that honor belongs to the Geonosian Queen Karina the Great, who would not be introduced until the frightening Legacy of Terror episode from Clone Wars Season 2, Episode 7. Karina was the one who laid all the Geonosian eggs and could even produce worms that could crawl into the brain of a dead body and reanimate their corpses, which is quite terrifying. Like, I definitely recommend that you guys give that episode a watch if you enjoy horror, because it's quite a fun episode. And also, this is super random, but whoever designed the balcony during the scene must have been down criminally bad, because what the hell is this design? I mean, don't get me wrong, I do appreciate the enthusiasm for that part of the female anatomy, but I think a puss porch in a Star Wars movie is kind of crazy work. This big show takes place in one of the Geonosians' Petranaki arenas, with Petranaki being their term for this cruel gladiator-style execution event. The Geonosians then bring out a couple of alien creatures to dine on our trio of heroes, the first of which is a horned reek creature, who are actually natural herbivores, but will eat meat and flesh if they are starved enough, which the Geonosians have done with this reek that goes for Anakin. The next creature that they bring out is an amphibious reptilian crustacean called an Acklay, and it's a creature that is sent after Obi-Wan Kenobi. In the wild, these predatory creatures typically hunt down their prey by looking for their prey's bioelectrical signature, which they can track down using a weird-looking body part right underneath their chin. Obi-Wan's fight with this Acklay was apparently inspired by a scene where a bunch of men fight a giant crab with poles in the 1961 film Mysterious Island. And lastly, the Geonosians bring out an alien feline called the Nexu for Padme, a creature that has an extra 2 eyes that gives them the infrared vision needed to track down the body heat of their prey during nighttime. And seeing all of these creatures, Anakin says that he has a bad feeling about this, a common Star Wars saying ever since it was first said by our heroes in the Millennium Falcon in A New Hope. But Anakin should have had a better feeling about this, because here come the Jedi to save the day, making their presence known after Mace Windu ignites his lightsaber at Count Dooku's neck. And while this is a very known fact at this point, I would be remiss to mention that Mace Windu's purple lightsaber was specifically requested by actor Samuel L. Jackson himself, who specifically wanted to see where he was at during the chaotic Jedi battle on Geonosis that's about to take place. And after taking some time to think about it, George Lucas would ultimately grant his request, even though it was common for Jedi to only wield blue and green lightsabers at the time. But speaking of Mace Windu's lightsaber, he actually gets a completely new lightsaber hilt in this movie than the one that he is seen wearing in The Phantom Menace, with Mace Windu apparently wanting to switch things up. But honestly, one of my favorite facts about Mace Windu's lightsaber is how it has the letters BMF engraved near the top of his hilt, with BMF of course standing for Bad Motherfucker. This is a reference to Samuel L. Jackson's past role in the film Pulp Fiction, where his character Jules has the word bad motherfucker on his wallet. The Jedi then begin their assault on the Separatist army of droids, eventually leading to Mace Windu chopping off the head of Jango Fett while his son Boba is forced to watch in horror. And in a future act of vengeance, this kid Boba would eventually take down an entire Star Destroyer in an attempt to kill Mace Windu, which was detailed in Season 2, Episode 20 of the Clone Wars animated series. Over the course of this battle, Anakin is handed a temporary new lightsaber with a green emitter, going from blue to green much like his son would eventually do in the original trilogy. But as the Jedi start to be overwhelmed by the Separatist forces, Count Dooku compliments Mace Windu's fighting and tells him that he deserves to have his name written amongst the greats in the Jedi archive, just like he himself was given a statue bust of his head. But then, out of nowhere, comes out Master Yoda pulling up with the newly approved clone army, courtesy of Jar Jar Binks. And as most of you can probably already tell, none of the suited clone troopers in this movie are actually real, but are a result of VFX that actually looked pretty damn realistic for the time. And now with a number of their ships and forces having been destroyed by this new threat, Count Dooku and his associates prepare to leave Geonosis. But before they do, Poggle the Lesser gives Count Dooku a copy of the Death Star schematics, showing that Palpatine has had plans to build his ultimate superweapon decades before the fall of the Republic. Now, if this is confusing for those who have watched Rogue One and figured that it was Mad Mikkelsen's Galen Erso who actually designed the Death Star, I can totally understand where you're coming from, because, it's kind of confusing. It was actually the Geonosians themselves that initially designed the Death Star years before Galen Erso was contacted in order to help the Empire with the creation of the Death Star's super laser, as Galen was an expert in harnessing various crystals for energy, especially kyber crystals, which the Death Star uses in order to fire its lasers. So, Jyn Erso's dad basically slightly altered the Geonosians' original design in order to accommodate the proper use of kyber crystals. Count Dooku then takes the plans to give to his master and heads to the hangar to make his big escape, not knowing that Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Padme were hot on his tail. But while trying to get to the hangar, Padme falls out of their low-altitude assault transport ship, causing Anakin to freak out and order that the troops turn the ship around. And although Obi-Wan is able to get Anakin to lock in and prioritize stopping Dooku, you can clearly see how frustrated Anakin is at Obi-Wan during this moment, because Anakin interprets that as yet another way that Obi-Wan Kenobi has gotten in his way when trying to protect the important women in his life. The Jedi eventually arrive just in time to confront Count Dooku, but Anakin, not wanting to be held back by his master anymore, decides to charge Dooku by himself, not thinking about the potential consequences of such an emotionally irrational response. And after a short duel between the two of them, Anakin would eventually get his right arm chopped off before getting hilariously force pushed away like a sack of potatoes, echoing how he would chop his own son Luke Skywalker's arm off in The Empire Strikes Back. But luckily for both Skywalker boys, they would each get a dope fully functional robotic arm as a replacement. This moment perfectly exemplifies the overall danger of the dark side, because walking the path of the dark side typically leads one to experiencing some sort of physical disfigurement before their ultimate demise. It happened to Darth Maul, it happened to Count Dooku when Anakin chopped his arms off in Revenge of the Sith, and it happened to Emperor Palpatine when he was left immobilized following his resurrection in The Rise of Skywalker. And even though General Grievous wasn't exactly Force-sensitive, he also lived a life of suffering as a part-human cyborg. By giving in to his dark-sided anger, Anakin would lose his right arm in this movie before losing even more limbs in the following movie when his dark-sided emotions would cause him to make a risky leap, even though that emo dingus clearly did not have the high ground. However, due to Count Dooku being the master of Obi-Wan's former master Qui-Gon Jinn, Count Dooku would eventually best both of these Jedi. And with Sir Christopher Lee being a whopping 79 years old at the time of filming, he obviously was not able to do all of his stunts during these lightsaber battles. So for the more athletic movements, George Lucas actually just superimposed Christopher Lee's face onto his stunt double, which is quite smart and ingenious for the time. But before he could actually kill them, he would be interrupted by his former master Yoda, and the two of them get into a big old tussle. And when directing his VFX team about Yoda's specific fighting style for his big duel with Dooku, he told them to make Yoda as if, quote-unquote, he was the illegitimate love child between Kermit the Frog and Miss Piggy, which is a really weird thing to say. But he mainly meant it so that the team could focus on making Yoda the bounciest boy in the bayou by having him hopping around like a frog and doing flips and shit. And it's kind of funny that Kermit, a green Muppet, would help inspire the movement of Yoda, a former green puppet voiced by a Muppet actor. And it kind of makes you wonder if the Rainbow Connection and the Force are indeed one and the same. This would of course be the first time that audiences have ever seen Yoda in action with a lightsaber, with showing such a thing to his loyal fans being one of George Lucas's major goals for this movie. But unfortunately, Count Dooku would decide to be a vagina balcony and choose to cheat by threatening Obi-Wan and Anakin's lives, forcing Yoda to have to save them as Dooku makes his escape in his Punwarka 116 class interstellar sloop Solar Sailor. Count Dooku then arrives at Darth Sidious's secret base at the works in the Coruscant Industrial District and informs the Phantom Menace that the war that he's manufactured is underway. This location is actually the same location that Count Dooku would end up slaying Jedi Master Yaddle shortly after the Battle of Naboo, as we learn in the Tales of the Jedi series on Disney+. And even though the Jedi have won the first battle of the Clone Wars, Obi-Wan and Mace Windu share uneasiness about Dooku's warning about the Phantom Menace controlling the useless Senate. But Yoda warns them to be careful about Dooku's warning, as the Sith like to plant seeds of mistrust in others in order to manipulate them. And yet, despite this, Mace and Obi-Wan still allowed Dooku's seed of mistrust to move them to be sort of scared of the Senate itself, leading them to ultimately making the dishonest action of having a conflicted Anakin spy on the Supreme Chancellor in Revenge of the Sith, paving the path towards the Jedi's own destruction. And before the movie ends with Anakin and Padme's wedding on Naboo, footage of Chancellor Palpatine and Princess Leia's future father, Bail Organa, watching the clone army assemble into transport ships is shown, with the Imperial March from the original trilogy playing in the background, symbolizing Darth Sidious's victory in finally assembling an army he can use to take over the Republic. But anyways, that is it for this breakdown of the Attack of the Clones from 2002. Let us know what you guys thought of this movie in the comments section down below. But like always, you guys can follow me at Mastertainment on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, wherever I am on the internet. But most importantly, follow Heavy Spoilers here on YouTube by hitting that subscribe button and maybe even hitting that like button if you guys enjoy this video. And again, hit up the Heavy Spoilers store today to pick up one of our cool, amazing shirts, either inspired by Andor, Fantastic Four, whatever. We got a lot of shirts for you over at that store, so head on over today. But like always, I've been MT, you guys have been amazing, and may the Force be with you. Bye.